Greetings from Tokyo. This is Daisuke Beppu. How are you doing today? I hope you are all doing very well and you are having a wonderful week. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to beg your pardon for I'd like to just take a moment of your time, if I may, to talk about a very special release from the Criterion collection, and that is Grand Illusion. Spine number 1 from the Criterion collection is Grand Illusion. This is a DVD, and this is a DVD release of a film that is a French film, a black and white film, directed by a gentleman whose name is Mr. Jean Renoir. This film is from 1938. The unfortunate thing about this particular release from the Criterion collection is that it is, as of the filming of this video, out of print, or OOP, which is a real shame because this is a real marvelous film to have, and it has a special significance in terms of Criterion collection collecting, in that it is spine number 1. Of course, there are other means by which one can watch this film. There have been other releases which are perfectly fine and lovely presentations of the film. So I encourage you, if you haven't already, to try to get a copy or try to find it and watch it maybe on a streaming service or something similar to that, if it is available, because it is a very interesting and cinematically significant work of art. Very quickly, if I may, just speak to you very briefly about the special features that appear on this DVD release. There is a trailer in which Jean Renoir discusses Grand Illusion and his personal war experiences. There is the audio essay by film historian Peter Cowie, which serves as a sort of commentary to the film. There's also archival radio presentation. Renoir and star of the film, Erich von Stroheim, accept Grand Illusion's Best Foreign Film honors at the 1938 New York Film Critics Awards. Pressbook excerpts, and also there is a restoration demonstration. So very briefly, let me now take this opportunity to just give a few comments about the film Grand Illusion. Now, I should just warn you now that I'll try to be as spoiler-free as possible, but I will talk about certain details of the film. And so if you are wary of listening to any spoilers, I would suggest that you stop this video now and just take the opportunity to watch the film, and then you can come back anytime and revisit this video at your leisure. If you're still here, then I'd like to continue the conversation with respect to Grand Illusion. So, La Grande Illusion, I think is actually translated more accurately into The Great Illusion rather than Grand Illusion. I think Grand Illusion is a little bit of a slight mistranslation, and I think there's actually a supplement material essay which talks about this particular point of the translation of the title into English. But it's called La Grande Illusion, and the English title is Grand Illusion. Grand Illusion is about, essentially, French officers that have been captured in battle during World War I, and they've been captured by the Germans, and they are in German prisoner of war camps. And these French officers are, in essence, trying to escape. And so the film is essentially about these French prisoners trying to escape their German captors. So it is a war film, and it is a war film set in the backdrop of World War I. However, it is an interesting war film for a number of reasons. The first reason is it is a war film, but it doesn't directly depict war. Specifically, what I mean is there are never any scenes that are shown, at least in this version, where we see direct shots or scenes or montages of war or battles or the carnage of war. Everything is always explained after the fact or reported. So therefore, there are scenes, for instance, of the reports of the battles at the front lines, and the French captives are responding to certain actions that are taking place in battle. But those are never seen. Those are always just told to us. There are also scenes, for instance, that are never shown but are just described. For instance, the actual instance of the planes being shot down, for instance, which leads to Lieutenant Marshal and Captain de Boileau. We never see the planes being shot down. We never see these officers being captured. We never see that action. We only see after the fact. We hear about what happened because we hear the discussion between German officers. And then later we see the two French captives being escorted into the German camp, and they're meeting for the first time of the very important character, Captain von Rauffenstein, played by Erich von Stroheim. So these are just examples of how this film depicts war, and it depicts war in a very interesting way. It doesn't depict it directly, it depicts it obliquely. So we are left with a war film that is not focusing on the horrors of war, but rather we are focusing on these characters and how they act under pressure. The immediate narrative impetus of the story, of course, is that these characters are trying to escape. So on one hand, we see these characters acting under pressure by essentially trying to come up with plans of escape. So we see them trying to dig a tunnel, or they're trying to think of a plan to escape a castle, or those sorts of ordeals, and the aftermath or the preparation with respect to those specific plans. So that's one area in which we see these human characters under pressure trying to deal with the situation. But another way we see the characters reacting under pressure is, I think, a much broader and grander one, and that is their interactions amongst each other and the interactions between the French soldiers or the French officers on the one hand and the German officers on the other hand. So this dynamic and this focus on human interactions between the various characters is what is at stake and what is at the heart of this film. We don't get any war footage, but we get the human interactions and how they react under pressure and what it is they are trying to preserve or to save, some kind of ideal which which transcends the Germans versus French rubric of World War I. They're trying to achieve some kind of higher noble ideal. The most immediate example, of course, being the relationship between the German captain, Captain von Rauffenstein, and then the French captain, Captain Boileau. They have a very interesting and deep relationship. And so they are trying to preserve some kind of nobility, some kind of honor amongst men. in an otherwise potentially chaotic situation that is war. And also this sense of camaraderie is very important, not only between, let's say, the noble characters, the captains, but also between, let's say, the lower classes, which is represented, of course, by the wonderful, dynamic Lieutenant Marshal, played by Jean Gabin. So we have the camaraderie amongst the French officers, and we have their plans and their digging of the tunnels and all that, which is the focus instead of the situations of war. And so what that does, I think it does an interesting thing. I think what it does is it makes the film in many ways timeless. You know, think about it, because if we were to have shots of, let's say, battles, World War I battles, that would be very, I think, quite thrilling and very cinematic on the one hand, but it would also tie the film immediately to the context of World War I specifically. And so I think the fact that there are no war scenes helps the film to transcend its World War I narrative base and transcend it to a much larger level when it comes to war. So we're not just talking about World War I, but we're talking about war in general. And I think that is a very key way to view this film, at least from my perspective as a viewer of this film. Because remember, this is a film that was released in 1938. It is a film that is about French officers and German officers in the context of war. There is also a character who is very important in the film, who is Rosenthal, played by Marcel Dalio, and Rosenthal is Jewish. So, and there is sometimes overt strain of anti-Semitism that runs through some of the characters with respect to Rosenthal's character. So I think all of this suggests that this film, while it is a World War I film, transcends its World War I narrative to a much broader scope, namely the scope of the context of war, which therefore can be transposed to the context of World War II. So it's very interesting. You know, we're watching a World War I film, but it is a World War I film that can immediately recall World War II. And I think this is very interesting. You know, this is released in 1938, so of course we are still in the throes of the European crisis. And so it is not yet full-blown war, but this is still a World War I film that is about World War II, and this is very interesting indeed. When we think of the horrors of war, of course, it is a very interesting concept and story approach that is the subject of many war films, but not this film. This film, as I say, does not focus on the horrors of war necessarily. It doesn't focus on the carnage of battle. It is a critical film because it shows Jean Renoir's strengths, namely the interaction between or amongst men under situations of pressure. So there is a real camaraderie and a real wonderful balancing act that's taking place. You know, there are many characters that are on the tapestry, and yet he weaves the narrative in such a way that we go from character to character to character to character, and some characters emerge and they leave and they come back again later on in the story. And then there are certain characters that come later on and then they are never to be seen again. You know, for example, the famous sequence involving the woman, Elsa, played very memorably by the famous actress Dita Parlo. So there is that sequence, but that is a very short sequence in the whole scheme of things. So in a sense, this film is almost like a series of vignettes or short films that involve the same characters. So it's almost like they're chapters of an overall narrative. So there's not one through line straight narrative, so to speak, but there are vignettes that occur, and each vignette has a sort of a resolution that occurs, and then we go to the next vignette, and then we go to the next vignette, and we go to the next vignette. So that is a very, I think, easy structure to follow with respect to this film, and thus I think it still makes it a very accessible film, even for today's audiences. Also, I should repeat that the fact that it doesn't depict World War I directly also, I think, helps it to become a timeless film, because rather than tie it directly to a historical event that is many, 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 many years in the past, it is essentially free from those restrictions, and therefore free to sort of roam in the imagination of the viewer. And so the viewer is therefore able to apply it to a much more broader discussion or interpretation with respect to the concept of war. Okay, so that is ground illusion, and so I hope this was interesting for you. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave any comments that you have or questions that you have down below. I will do my best to address them and answer them to the extent that I am able. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much, and I hope you are all well and you have a great rest of your day. Anyway, cheers.